Our Middle East correspondent Ben Knight joins us. Ben, first of all, in your view, what was the scale of the protests throughout the day?
Well, Jane, it's so difficult to judge, but I know that this has, in my opinion, been the largest one yet. Early this morning, we saw lines of people trying to get into the square. Now, the lines were very long and the number of people inside the square was huge. But the reason why I suppose the lines were long was because this was a far more tightly controlled rally, a far more tightly controlled protest that we've seen in previous days. Not that they haven't been. Each time there's been this kind of gathering in the square, you've seen the army standing on the sidelines and you've seen civilian volunteers doing things like checking ID cards and frisking people. 3 or 4 lines of body searches, and each time someone searches you, they apologise. But today it was even tighter than usual. It was really down to one single file for men, one single file for women going in. But as the day wore on, it became clear that this was a large protest, a very large protest, but for the moment, it hasn't been enough. This stalemate, this standoff in Egypt still continues.
Now, as we're talking, we're seeing live pictures of Cairo coming from Al Jazeera, and we can see that there are still many, many people in the centre of the city. What happens now, Ben? Because, as you say, the president has not, he's not budged.
Well, that's the question. This is a stalemate. This is a standoff. As we've just heard, the president has said that he would like to quit, but doesn't feel that he can because it would cause chaos in the country, or that the Muslim Brotherhood would take over. The pressure is growing from the US and from Europe publicly, and you can bet privately as well, that there are very, very strong messages to Egypt that they really need to get this sorted out. Now, what we've seen over the past couple of days, and then again today, is the new Egyptian government, the current Egyptian government, making all of these noises, saying that, look, we are trying, we really are on track to get these democratic reforms in place, on the way to have our elections. But first element is that the people simply don't believe it. They do not believe that the government is going to do this. They say these are the same faces that we've seen before, and we don't trust them to actually make this happen. Now, if the president does quit, the question then becomes, who does the power fall to? Is it the Vice President, Omar Suleiman, who, in the eyes of the protesters, is just as bad? So, in a way, Hosni Mubarak may well be right. Are the protesters going to accept anything other than the complete removal of this regime? Now, what you're starting to see is that some Egyptians are saying, look, we accept that Hosni Mubarak has said that he will leave at the next election. What we really want is stability, because this country is at an absolute standstill. This has now been going for 11 days. The protesters in the square say it's going to go for 12, 13, 14, whatever, until Hosni Mubarak quits. But the shops are not open. The banks are out of money. You can't get anything to eat. The hotels are starting to run out of food. You cannot book into a hotel in Cairo, in the centre of Cairo at the moment, simply because they don't have enough food to cater for more guests. So if you talk to people who are outside of the Cairo area, they're getting very, very frustrated with what's going on.
Is it too strong to say that there is anarchy on the streets in Egypt?
I think it is now, and I think it wasn't the case a couple of nights ago, and indeed for several nights over the past week. There was anarchy, there was lawlessness. Now, there are still no police in the centre of Cairo, and what we have heard tonight is that there have been some skirmishes taking place between pro- and anti-Mubarak protesters, but nothing really of note. This was a remarkably peaceful protest, and as I say, remarkable because it's taken place in the context of the centre of one of the world's major cities where there are no police. And when we were down there today, it was not the army that were keeping control. It was civilians. Now, the army had the tanks and the army had the barbed wire and the army was standing on the sidelines and they had their helmets on and they had their rifles in their hands, but they weren't doing anything. It was the civilians, it was the organisers of these protests, whoever they are, who had got the volunteers to, as I say, check the IDs, body searches or frisking to make sure that no one was carrying a weapon inside. So, despite the lack of police, and the government still has decided that it's not the right time, clearly, to send the police back into the centre of Cairo, which is a policy that just boggles the mind. But no, there is not really anarchy on the streets. What we saw today was the military firing into the air on occasion to keep the two sides apart. This was a large protest, and there were rumblings on the sidelines with some pro-Mubarak protesters trying to approach the square. It was the army that kept them apart, but that's as far as the policing goes.